Coming to hear our talk and to Blender for having us. Hope everyone's feeling good. We're slightly sweating after 25 minutes of tech issues, but hopefully this goes all right. We're from BlueZoo Animation Studio. I'm Dane. I'm a director and 3D artist. I'm joined with Vasil, our lead R&D engineer, and Josh, one of our 3D artists and in-house Blender wizards. So BlueZoo is a studio based in London. We work on a broad range of stuff, from children's animated TV series to commercials, short films, online content, mobile stuff, so quite a broad range. And we mainly specialize in 3D animation, but we also do quite a lot of 2D and also quite a lot of sort of hybrid styles. So I'll just give you a little taste of the work we've done over the years. Thanks. So yeah, the studio's kind of grown quite a lot. We're in our 25th year now. Studio's, I think, just over 200 people. And it's full of really passionate artists, and we are always trying to experiment and try new things. We're the first studio in 2015 to use GPU rendering for a series. We've since done a few shows in rendering in Unreal, and we even did a short film where we projected animation onto polystyrene and filmed it. So we're always looking to try and push ourselves kind of creatively and technically. And our short form department is a bit of a playground for this. We sort of do, because we aren't always having to adhere to the pipeline, because we have different budgets, different clients, and we work in so many different styles that we often try out new tools and new techniques. And that can be a lot of fun, and it means that we can also explore using software that we don't normally use. So Blender is kind of the key software that we've started adopting. So this is just a reel of some of the work we've done with Blender over the last few years. So in 2019, I think with the release of 2.8, we started paying attention to Blender and seeing what it could do. And we very quickly found that it was incredibly artist-friendly, and it also solved a lot of problems in different ways to the software we were using. So we then looked at how do we slowly adopt this into our pipeline. Like I say, the studio is quite big, and that means a lot of things can be quite rigid. And so in our commercial department, we basically started looking at how we can bookend our workflow to kind of encompass Blender. So we'd start by using more just the lighting rendering tools in Blender. So we'd use our kind of normal 3D software for most of the process, bring everything across and get really comfortable with those tools. Then we'd start looking at how do we do Lookdev and shaders and modeling, get comfortable with those tools, but still kind of jump out to do rigging and animation because those tools scared us. And then jump back and do lighting and render until we finally got to a place where we could do the whole process. There's not a huge amount of time always to do R&D, so we really had to do it live on projects as we went, kind of bit by bit. And so now we're in a position where we've managed to do dozens of client projects since. So the entertainment landscape is changing quite a bit, and we need to really adapt. There are smaller budgets for a lot of projects. The client demands feel like they're even higher, and somehow time is also less. And we ultimately want to make sure we're still making content that we're really proud of and hits a certain quality. And that's part of our mission statement. So we've really kind of tried to develop a two-tier, what we call a two-tier pipeline. which kind of gives our partners best of both worlds. So one tier is dedicated to the sort of award-winning, demanding quality of high-end specials and episodic work, while the other one is more kind of optimized for cost-effective, fast turnaround, digital content and ideation. And like I say, we still want to make sure that we're hitting like a high enough bar with that. We don't want to feel like we're making something that feels really cheap and cobbled together. So it's really just looking at what tools we can use to help us achieve that with a smaller team, but still kind of higher aspirations. And so we thought Blender, after all our sort of the last few years getting really comfortable with it, we felt that Blender was the best way to do this because it is so artist-friendly and flexible. So we've been spending some time over the last year and a bit developing some tools, which we've dubbed ZooKit, to really help us do that. And so I'll pass to Vasil here to talk to you about that.
Hello, everybody. My name is Vasil. I'm the lead R&D engineer at Zoo, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the specific aspect of ZooKit, as well as kind of give you an overview of what it's meant to be. As you can see, and kind of Dane alluded to, it's how do we create more with less. It's this journey of creating workflows and tools that let us create like a variety of visual styles, not aiming for a specific visual style, but rather for each visual style, find what are the tools, kind of what are the limitations and constraints of that style that let us be very effective in production and try to address those. So it's a combination of tools and workflows. We're kind of still early in the journey of like creating this big package of those tools and workflows. And so far, the focus has mostly been on asset generation specifically. And if we have a look at kind of what kind of assets we would usually be doing, like props, environments, and characters make up the vast majority of those, where obviously we can't prepare for every kind of assets that we'd ever get, but we can get like a long way there. And we know kind of from the get-go that it'll be the case where each show or like each production will need their own kind of slightly customized tools. And that's kind of something that we're building in kind of the framework of ZooKit, where everything is built in a way where it's expected to be customized for a specific show. And so looking at these assets, let's start by having a look at kind of the asset that's probably like at the core of all of our shows that we do at Zoo, which is going to be the characters. And we've split it up between body and face, so we can get like the maximum modularity and reusability between the different pieces of the characters. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the character now. Now, thinking about how our kind of usual pipeline with characters works, we would go from design to modeling to rigging, this kind of fairly linear pipeline. There are usually 3 different departments. There's a lot of going back and forth. Changes in one have huge impacts on all the other ones. And it's fairly common for changes to go all the way from one end to the other end. While obviously kind of for this digital first content, we want to have something significantly faster to iterate with. So there's probably many ways of doing it, but the one that we kind of settled on was try and see if we can combine all of this into a single tool. So a single artist can iterate really quickly on all 3 aspects at the same time. And so starting to build that tool, what we ended up doing is having a look at all kinds of designs that we'd like to be able to hit with a tool like this, and try and sort of distill what's the kind of the most common parts of them, and kind of came up with these two templates, which are obviously very similar. The main difference between them is that the torso and the head on one of them is kind of one big piece of geometry, and the other one is 2 separate ones. But it's no surprise to anybody who's done any kind of design in the past that they're all made up of these really kind of simple geometric shapes. In this case, it looks like all of them are these kind of elongated, rounded object with some tapering. And looking at how we can kind of construct that, the closest thing I think we have in terms of geometric primitives is going to be the capsule. And so just a quick reminder on obviously kind of what a capsule is, I'm sure that everybody knows, is these 2 spheres connected with a cylinder. And that's kind of like the most, I suppose, important definition of it, because it allows us to treat it as 2 different points in 3D space and a line that connects them, which kind of gives us a lot of benefits, as we'll see a little bit later. And so looking at the capsules and what we can do with them, the most basic things are just move it around, reorient it, change its proportions. Anytime we're changing the length, we want to have a lot of resolution, because obviously topology matters in animation massively. We then also found that just kind of these round shapes very quickly become quite boring. So we need ways of actually giving it a little bit of boxiness. We've done it kind of along the way of the capsule. Similar with the radius, that is also something we can kind of vary at either end or along the way. and then this chopping off of the caps. That gives us a lot of kind of visual interest in things like fingers at the very kind of bottom of torsos, where we would have kind of like more flat bottoms of the torso, and obviously kind of things like elephant legs, that kind of thing. Now, we know that with just geometric shapes, geometric transformations, it's unlikely that we'd get all the kind of the designs and visual transforms that we'd be interested in having. So we've got a lattice on top of it. That's a lattice we can have as much resolution as we want, and it can also kind of support fairly extreme deformations. This is not particularly useful, but just kind of a demonstration that as long as we keep the idea of having two transforms connected by a long, stretchy bed, we can sort of merge these together, and you'll still kind of work as a capsule, like conceptually. So we can rig it as a capsule, as we'll see in a sec. And so going back to this just being like a capsule that we're going to be trying to turn into a body part, let's see what we can do by just adding more of these capsules. Quite quickly, we can get something that looks a lot like a hand, right? Now, the biggest downside is that there's a lot of visual separation between them. It's clear that they're different capsules. And that's where 4.5's custom normals and normal blending allow us to kind of mask that off a little bit. This is an older version. Later in the presentation, you'll see it on a character where it looks significantly better. But the biggest downside with it is that it's a bit slow. So for now, we're just going to turn it off. And we're just going to turn it on only at render time. And so zooming out a little bit, just again, thinking about this as being, the building blocks of a character. If we have this body part, we can just create a bunch of these and come up with something that looks like a character. All of these are the exact same capsule, just kind of being deformed in different ways. And then because we have this capsule that, again, everything is made up, it means that we can have an automated scripted way of rigging it because everything is made up of that one capsule. And so we can literally, at the press of a button, go from the design, the T-pose that we had, to an animated, skinned and animated character. And then very quickly go back between design and rig, until we get all the variations that we are interested in. And they're all going to be sharing the exact same rig, so we can have the animation on all of them and see what our design will look like in motion. So let's have a look at the rigging process a little bit. As I said, we have this kind of literally rig button, build the rig. The reason why we can do that is, again, we benefit massively from having a capsule. These two transforms on either end of the capsule, they allow us to create kind of like a coordinate system, and that we can use to position other transforms, really mostly bones, along the capsule. So we can do things like this, where when we press the build rig button, exactly what happens is that in the coordinate system, we will create the bones that are necessary. So for a tail, for example, we might have like lots of kind of uniformly spaced bones to get all the smooth articulation that we want. For a torso, we have like 4 or 5 bones. For something like an arm, we'd have just shoulder, elbow, and wrist, as in this example. And then the next thing that's going to happen is we use Rigify to define this as a rig type of, arm rig type. We use Rigify because obviously kind of modular rigging system just lends itself perfectly to this modular way of building characters. But we don't expect the artists using the tool to know any rigging. So whether we use Rigify or not is kind of like behind the scenes. It's just part of the automated process, so it can be swapped if needed. And then the last thing that happens is this meta rig that we've created at the first step just gets built into an actual rig. So we end up with something that looks like a rigged arm. Obviously, we're missing skinning. So again, the benefits of using the capsule mean that we can kind of partition it along the way, the same way that we create the bones, and just come up with an automated skinning algorithm that doesn't do the same thing as the default skinning, which is just the closest point, but rather partition the space and skin it based on the idea of, again, kind of varying the length along of a capsule. And then if we have a look at the other body parts, they're kind of exactly the same. The only thing that's different is where we position the bones along the capsule and what Rigify rig type we use. And so if we go back to this kind of idea of having these two templates, what they end up really just looking like is recipes for how to parent these parrots together to make up a character. And if we have a look in 3D, that's kind of what they would look like, or like an example of what they would look like. If we want to have a quadruped or octopod, anything like that, we just write a different template and keep using the exact same capsule system. Excuse me. So let's focus on one character and kind of go over how we iterate on the design. We'd start with one of these templates. Then using these transformations that I showed you before, we'll just adjust them to get different proportions, maybe use the lattice to give it a little bit of form, and then press the rig button, get something that looks a lot like just a standard Rigify biped rig. And at that point, I would usually advise people just create some sort of an animation so you can see what your design looks like in motion. And then we have these two modes of the tool, the rig mode and the design mode. So the iterative process, which basically means that we can switch back to design and start making more changes. They can be fairly drastic. Obviously, as you'll see in a sec, that has a huge impact on what the animation would look like. But it does mean that you can go back and forth and see the exact same animation on a different rig. And again, just pressing the rig button gives us a rigged version of the character, and we can see the animation in motion. And then the last thing, the thing that I think is the most important about it too, is this just iterative idea. We can create all of these characters really, really quickly, check what the animation looks like, see what we like, see what we don't, and just keep on going. And so I'm sure that you're tired of looking at these great faceless blobs. All of the capsules are coming with UVs, so it means that we can have either painted or procedural textures on them. And the other thing that's missing, obviously, is the face, which Dane is going to talk to us.
Cool, so the face rig. So this was actually one of the first bits of ZooKit we started developing, because I think before we kind of understood how we wanted to build the character's body, we would often find this was the bit that took the longest to kind of set up and design and rig. So the idea behind it is to make it very customizable, so it can cover like a really broad range of styles, both 2D and 3D. And also be able to make it so that the same animation controls drive both, or all styles, and be really simple and intuitive to the artist. Again, we're trying to sort of like mask everything, I guess, inside of a rig and custom properties so that whoever uses this doesn't have to get into the weeds of anything. They can kind of just work on the surface. So it's almost a bit like a video game mentality when you design a character. Obviously, like this is just some example of some of the styles it can do, but it obviously couldn't do like a high-end kind of Pixar character. It's more designed for lack of a better term, stuck-on face. We do a lot of work in BlueZoo, which is like a bit more graphical in the design. So this works really well for a lot of the work that we do, especially the 2D faces. So this is just a little look at some of the design tools. So just trying to distill it down to 3 parts. We didn't think it was necessary to kind of have like a nose designer. Like we can leave that with the character body or with the modeler if they want to add extra elements. So you can kind of see on the eyes there. So we've got features to do things like procedurally add outlines. You can obviously transform it as well in a normal way. You can change the thickness of stuff. Obviously, you can change the color of things. There's different textures sort of layered within that, so you can get different kinds of irises or pupils. There's like a highlight that can be blurred and turned off and changed. So a lot of things that kind of feel like common sense to add, but kind of took a lot of like looking at different characters and going, oh, we need that, and then we're going to need that, and then we're going to need that. So it's kind of slowly grown. Adding things like the eyelid rim. And again, making sure it all works when it goes into 3D and kind of lines up one-to-one. So when you're, adjusting the scale of these things, it all kind of corresponds, whether you're in 2D or 3D. You can see they're adding simple things like a bit of a bump weight to the pupil. And then this was kind of having a bit more of a hyperreal kind of eye. So this is done with a bit more of a complicated geometry node setup that kind of allows you to adjust the pupil or the iris, or the cornea, and it still respects the 2D design. So you can like toggle back and forth, but you're still getting the same results, if that makes sense. And then with the eyebrows, we kept it, that's probably the simplest piece, obviously colors and roughness and all that kind of thing. But we also have a few like shape keys that are kind of nested beneath it, which you can just toggle between for different shapes. And again, we can kind of preload this with more, depending on the show or the style, and then they can just kind of sit there dormant until you might need them. And then a very simple way to sort of extrude that into a 3D shape. And then with the mouth, it is, again, a lot of the same sort of things. The lips are, essentially the outline. But then for the 3D mouth, we're actually using a Boolean approach, which historically isn't the most stable way to do a mouth, but it's pretty stable in Blender, so especially with the new manifold settings. So we do rely on that for the 3D mouth. We have been looking a little bit at I'm sure everyone's sort of seen the Pixar's Win or Lose, sort of blended detachable mouth. So we've been looking a little bit at how we can add that as maybe like a third version. But the Boolean one certainly cuts out a lot of the legwork when it comes to blending the texturing and all that kind of stuff. So for now, it's kind of working okay. And then again, for the 3D mouth, we've got the ability to sort of separate the teeth, and then you can modify each of those teeth and adjust the roundness. Just trying to really anticipate what a designer would want and what a modeler would want to be able to do. And the reason we expose all this as custom properties, because obviously you could go into the shader editor and do what you want to do, is so that we can kind of preserve everything in the asset library, which I'll show in a minute. So for the animation controls, again, the goal is just to make sure it's all the same set of controls that the animator's dealing with, whether it's 2D or 3D. And they're all nested, so we have a bunch of hidden bones at the bottom, and then you've got your animation controls, and then you've got your design controls. So depending on what artist is working on it, they can work on different stages. And the idea being that neither one would kind of mess with the other one's work. So if you pose a character, you can keep working on design, go back, and you can reset your controls without messing with anything else. So it's kind of again, a really simple solution, but works quite nicely. And much like the characters and the capsule, and trying to keep things very simple geometrically, the character's face is also made of very low poly stuff that's just kind of got layers of geonodes and modifiers to give them like a clean roundness, but it means we're really kind of skinning like individual vertices. But yeah, hopefully you agree we can get quite a lot of expression and shaping in the posing. And then, yeah, just to show a little bit under the hood of what's going on here. So in order to kind of attach it quickly to a character's head, because there are so many like sort of hidden properties in terms of offsetting things and how the controls need to move around versus the design controls, we basically pin everything using shrink wrap, modifiers and constraints onto 3 different wraps, one for the eyebrows, one for the eyes, one for the mouth. So everything is kind of attached accordingly to that. So when the artist gets it, they just need to attach these 3 things onto their character, and in theory, everything should work nicely. But again, going a step further, we didn't want them to have to worry about that. So we just made this very simple add-on. You import the face rig, it comes in with library overrides all set up. You click the face rig and then the head, and then you can just, in a click of a button, wrap it to the face. And then another click of the button to set up the 3D mouth, which creates like a linked duplicate of the head, which is hidden, so the controls still slide kind of cleanly. But then the renderable head has the Boolean, and everything's kind of set up as it needs to be. So yeah, like I say, with the pose library, so obviously this works like anything, and like Vasil was saying with the design and the performance, you can obviously then choose any of these pose expressions, and they'll work for any style that you've designed. But then what's also quite nice is, because we have exposed all the custom properties and everything else inside the rig, it means you can then save styles as well. So if you're making a whole cast of characters, you could very quickly just assign that design that you spent time on onto each character very quickly. Or if we're doing a pitch or something and we're not entirely sure which way we want to take it, it means that we can spend time exploring in 3D a bit more and trying different things. Even if it's just sort of, does it work better with 2D eyes or 3D eyes? Sometimes these commercial projects are such fast turnarounds. We've got like 2 days to design something. So the quicker we can get into 3D and start sort of showing it in context, the better. Cool, so kind of bringing together all the ZooKit stuff, we took, so at the top there is one of the shows we did for Netflix, Big Tree City. And it's a really good example and kind of what got us thinking about making something like this, which is really modular characters, really like graphic design, So on the left there, the original rig, which would have taken about 3 weeks. And then in the middle is our ZooKit rig. So that's made using everything that Vasil showed you, and the face rig as well. And then obviously a little animation on the right there. And that only took a couple of days to get that rigged and up and ready. So hopefully, yeah, we kind of feel like we're able to get close to the right quality. Again, it won't service every kind of style, but it kind of feels like for a lot of the stuff we do, it's actually a really great way to build characters. And now I'll hand to Josh to talk a little bit about the Lookdev and other tools.
Thanks. So I'm Josh. I'm a 3D generalist at BlueZoo, and I've been working a little bit on like some of the material tools, and not that much on like the Lookdev material side, but more on like the environment and prop stuff. But just to quickly go through what we have for in terms of shading for this. So in terms of the material workflow, we're like relying heavily on the asset browser to just have this library of sort of preset base materials that we can just drag and drop onto like our environments or characters. And yeah, under the hood, they're kind of built from like custom node groups so that we can very easily like change different parameters and stuff on this, so you don't have to go diving into like a very complex node tree. And it also means that we can go ahead and like swap out different parts before this. So if you wanted to change like the patterns or the base color or things, you can swap out, you know, build your own node trees before this. And we've also been developing like some custom node groups to help with just sort of like utility functions. So a big problem that we usually have is the textures, like procedural texture coordinates, like generated in objects swimming on deforming geometry. So we've made this sort of coordinates plus setup with geometry nodes to basically store these procedural textures before like the rig or any deformation is applied. And that means that we can just really quickly sort of drag and drop with procedural coordinates textures onto these things and not have to worry about UVs or any texture swimming and things like that. And also using, just on like a small little note, using gizmos in the viewport to quickly scale and rotate these coordinates as well, just for a bit more like ease of use type stuff. And then, yeah, this is an example of using like one base material and then swapping out different textures from this library of patterns we have to get a lot of variation from that. So yeah, it's just about using fewer materials really and seeing how much we can get from those. And then onto lighting, we have this custom HDR rig with presets as pose libraries in the asset browser. So the way the rig is set up, basically, it is an actual rig in Blender. So you have custom properties on the bones that you can then create presets for, like night, day, and this kind of thing. And that just allows you to very quickly like drag and drop these different presets in. And yeah, it's kind of nice that this HDR thing is built sort of procedurally and in a more simple way, because I think it lends itself to the sort of simplest traditional 3D style of animation that we have. And yeah, we have like a little add-on as well to just bring this in with like a custom preset automatically too. And then this is just some examples of using that HDR rig on a couple of test scenes to get some different sort of moods very quickly. So on to props and environments. This is where we're using a lot of geonodes and procedural approaches to this to try and improve speed. So the main feature requirements for the environment tools really were that they were like very simple to use, drag and drop type stuff, so that like a single artist could very quickly bring them into their scene, and sort of, you know, maybe the animator who's working on the scene could just bring it in the environment and have it sort of set up fairly quickly. But also be modular enough to swap out different elements or swap in like a custom model geo as well if we wanted to. So if you wanted to bring in your own custom trees but still use like the same scattering setup, you could do that too. So yeah, the only stuff that's sort of like locked down, like in this forest example, is how the sort of bushes like walk towards the trees and the grass like scatters around the bushes. Stuff that would, you know, take quite a while to do in like a traditional workflow. And this is some examples of stuff, some city stuff, quite sort of work in progress stuff, but basically using like a building generator, making use of the modifier stack to create these procedural buildings and then pack them onto curves to quickly generate like city environments for people to use in their animations, basically. And then, yeah, just like a very simple cloud generator too, just thinking of little tools that we can make to help make the sort of Lookdev or rendering process a bit easier. And then, yeah, so talking a bit about the asset browser, we're heavily sort of relying on this for presets of things because it just makes for a very nice sort of drag and drop workflow. So we have like a few different layers of sort of presets. So you have like a very high level layer of the environment itself, which would be like the actual forest. And then you have like asset previews. So like the tree, for example, the grass would be on like the asset level. And then going down from there, you have like the node or modifier level basically, or you could obviously swap this out for like custom modeled stuff. Yeah, and then going on to how we're like making use of the modifier stack with some of these assets. So, for example, like on the building on the right, you can see that the modifier stack like reflects the actual structure of the building quite nicely. So we've built it so that you have like a floor modifier, so you can stack these modifiers, like stack 2 floors on top of each other to reflect that in the building, and then like customize the types of windows you have on each one, or whether it has doors or bricks, these kind of things. And also like layering up these building trims in between the floors with like future potential to swap out different modifiers as well if you wanted different kinds of trims or different kinds of roofs, this kind of thing. And a very similar concept with the tree, but to go a bit more in depth with how the tree works, basically, well, you can see some of the parameters being changed over there, but it's built from there's a couple ways you can build it. So you could build it from a grease pencil stroke and then using grease pencil to curves, convert that into basically the tree trunk, and then branch off of that tree trunk, and then add the canopy. And yeah, so you can see like how those nodes sort of work together to build that. And obviously it can be built either as the modifier stack or in the node tree if you want a bit more customizability. And the nice thing about building it in the node tree is that we can then make use of, say, the for each element loop to randomize these trees like in the actual environment automatically without having to, make a bunch of unique variations of this. And then, yeah, showing you how this modifier stack sort of reflects on like the environment level. So it's a very similar kind of concept, but just sort of at a higher level than that. So you start out with like this base geometry, and then you layer on like the trees and then the bushes after that. And then the nice thing about doing it like this is that the data from like where the trees are can be read by the bushes so that they can clump towards the trees and that kind of thing. So the environment is all sort of like one entity and can talk to different elements of itself throughout the modifier stack. And then, yeah, there's also the option for having like custom modifiers added in between the steps. So, for example, like with animation, you often want like a very clear area that, there aren't any trees or bushes, so you can position your characters in the camera wherever you want them. So we have like this custom tool for adding in a clearing, using gizmos in the viewport to sort of drive that as well. And then, yeah, so this is an example of one of the tools we have, which is something very common. It's just a procedural way to add like soft hills sort of thing, which is really useful because the sort of traditional workflow for this would be obviously using like proportional editing or something like that, which if you ever want to go back and change it, can be a bit annoying to have to go back and flatten stuff out and then remake stuff. So it's nice just to have like this gizmo-based viewport control for that. And obviously these can be like layered up and all that good stuff. And you can go back and change like any parts of the base terrain setup at any point in the process as well. It's a little bit laggy on this demo, but yeah, it's just a lot of trees. So yeah, another tool that we have, which is kind of useful, is something that I made because I think we often have trouble with fully procedural environments, in that if you ever have like a tree that's just right in the way of where you want the camera to be or something like this, it can just be really annoying. And without like changing the seed and changing the whole composition, it can be nice just to have this tweak tool, which basically works by this yellow gizmo selects the nearest tree using like the sample nearest in geometry nodes. And then you get this transform gizmo that allows you to then move the selected instance around or delete it or whatever you want to do with it, basically. So this is a time-lapse of using these tools like on an actual piece of animation. So yeah, bringing in the animation, bringing in the preset from the asset library, and just quickly setting up a couple of these custom tree presets and stuff like that in a second. But yeah, you can start to see how by just changing parameters and dragging and dropping in these various tools can help you just quite quickly generate like an interesting composition. Obviously like limited within a certain degree of style, like design choices, but hopefully with enough to sort of have enough uniqueness there. So here I'm just using the soft select to sort of line up the doors so they sit on the ground nicely and stuff. And then, yeah, just tweaking a lot of the parameters for the trees and the bushes, and you can really see them clumping there. And then using a tree preset and modifying it with a custom canopy. So I'm just making like these custom, more simple canopy shapes for this one, which I then can plug into the tree setup and have like leaves scatter on them and the materials applied and all that. So yeah, just making another variation of that here as well. Pretty simple. And then, yeah, plugging those trees into like the environment tool, switching them out, and just tweaking a couple of the things after the fact. But yeah, just really leaning into like the procedural nature of how this is all set up. And then, yes, some bespoke dressing as well, using the grass preset, which is again like node-based procedural things, so you can change like the seeds and the size to get completely unique clumps, and same with the bushes as well. So a lot of customizability in terms of that. And yeah, just plugging them in on the background hills and very quickly creating a composition. So that was about 12 minutes to make in real time. So it was a very quick process, and typically with more traditional, like destructive workflows, that would have taken a lot longer, especially when it comes to things like having the bushes and grass follow certain rules about where they're distributed. It means that someone bringing this in doesn't have to think about any of that. It's all sort of built in under the hood. And yeah, that's pretty much it. So this is a final render of that scene, using the cloud tool as well in the background. But yeah, I think it's pretty useful for fast turnaround content and as like an artist tool, without necessarily having to know a bunch of geonodes to use it. And there are future plans as well to expand on the environment tools, so including more presets like maybe desert or space environments, and more tools for existing environments as well, just built as node groups as well, modularly. But yeah, that's it from me, so I'm going to hand you over to Vasil. Thanks.
Right, so thinking a little bit about the future again, going back to kind of this slide, thinking about the two different pipelines, there's one thing that really sets them apart for sure. I mean, there's many things, but probably kind of the pillar, like the main thing in the middle is this keyframe animation. This is kind of what we traditionally have always done in BlueZoo. Obviously, it gives us full control over the animation, but it comes with a significant cost. So looking at how we can kind of optimize and create these workflows for digital-first media, it's very clear that we're going to need to look for different ways of inputting the animation. And so we've been kind of exploring different ways of trying to input that animation. There's been kind of a lot of research going on, not just in BlueZoo. A lot of people are doing stuff like that online. It's really interesting to see. And we feel like all of these kind of, these are obviously not exhaustive, but like all of these kind of ideas, they are not necessarily going to replace keyframe animation for your classical kind of animated content, kids' TV animated content, but what we are really interested in doing is finding what are the visual styles that really work with these input methods, and really kind of exploit that combination between the input method and the visual style. So we're really benefiting from the constraints and the limitations to make sure that we kind of get all the efficiencies in the production while still creating content that, just because it lends itself perfectly to this visual style, is something that we can really be proud of. And it's unlikely that we can just do it with the kind of these magical input methods, but likely we need kind of post-processing. And so this can range from classical things like smoothing and pose libraries and loops and so on, but to also kind of more experimental stuff like building these gameplay-like rigs inside of Blender where you can use a controller or something like a controller to actually kind of drive the character inside of the scene and record your animation that way. And so looking at kind of some examples of how these can be exploited in Blender, we can see that all of these have some sort of a kind of pointer capture, or whether that's, all of these are, I think, using the mouse, but it can be kind of capturing, it could be like mocap from a webcam, it could be capturing a stylus, it could be, as we're going to see in a sec, capturing your mobile phone. And what's really important about these is that they're designed to leverage the fact that they're going to be, like, for lack of a better term, kind of puppeteered, captured. You can see that none of them really, other than the kind of the example at the top left, have legs making contact with the floor. Obviously, kind of if we're puppeteering and we are relying on something being captured, other than having like a full body IK solution, it's unlikely that we'd ever get anything that kind of gives us the perfect contact with the floor. So this is a great example of how we need to be kind of finding these styles and designs that really, really work with the input methods. So we're not just kind of trying to create the same content that we've always created, but with just like different input devices. But rather we are trying to optimize specifically for the actual kind of input device. And so here's the other example of using a smartphone with this app that kind of transfers the movements of your phone to a 3D camera in the scene, and then layering a bunch of these and using them to drive different parts of the rig. As you can see, you can get like a great kind of example of like toyetic animation like Lego, because it kind of lends itself perfectly for that almost like handheld sort of animation of the toy. And then looking at kind of the examples of what we've done so far, just a limited example of what we've done so far with ZooKit. We've been using it largely kind of for experimenting with stuff, but it's also being used in pitches and in production. These are kind of some examples of doing that, and also of obviously kind of just testing the tools themselves. And so that's kind of it from us. Thank you very much for listening. And that gives us about 5 minutes for questions, if anybody has any. Yeah, you go first.
So you share the same rig for every character. So I imagine that you have an animation library. How do you correct animation, like for a different shape of character? Do you use NLA, or what's your work?
Yeah, so the question is, we're using the same rig for all the characters. How do we reuse animation across it using an animation library? The answer is that really the kind of animation reuse is mostly inside of this design tool. So all of these animations are just kind of designed as part of the, sorry, not designed, but like made as part of the design process, so we can visualize what the different designs are going to look like with the same animation. Now, for the actual kind of animation process, any libraries that we're going to be building, they're going to be very bespoke to like a specific kind of archetype of a character. So the same way that I had this design like a really kind of tall, potentially kind of muscular character, to changing it to a really short, stubby character with kind of shorter arms. I'm not sure how clear it was, but the hand of the character was going inside of the head. These are the kind of things that, other than sort of some smart retargeting, which is definitely on the cards for us, there's no way really to kind of show. So for now, really the animation reuse is, although kind of technically possible, it comes with those caveats, and it's really just meant to kind of explore the different designs, while for production, we're going to have specific animation libraries built for the characters that we're going to use. Yeah, you go first.
How are you handling skinning? So if you're like using geometry nodes to create the capsules and generating the geometry, if you then rig that, animate it, then you had an example where you went back and changed the proportions, and it still worked. Yeah, how are you handling skinning? Are you applying that geometry and then undoing it?
Exactly, yeah. So anytime that, sorry, the question is, if we're using geometry nodes to create the capsules, how do we retain the skinning between different iterations if the geometry is changing? The way that it works is that we don't really retain it between the same kind of geometries. The capsule, we apply all of the geometry nodes modifiers to the capsule before it gets rigged, but all of that happens as part of the build rig process. So in the background, all of these capsules get baked to just geometry. That geometry gets skinned, and it gets becomes part of the rig. We can animate it, do whatever we need with it, and then when we go back to design modes and make any changes, we just press that re-rig button again, and we're guaranteed to get the same structural rig, because obviously it's using the same kind of rigging template. It's just very different geometry, but it doesn't really matter because the skinning is handled automatically. So whether we have 2 or 5 extra edge loops, it's gonna look, it can't be identical, obviously, but it's gonna be roughly the same. Any other questions? Yes, you're over there.
For characters, the performance of characters, is there anything needed to get them to perform for the animators? Like performance-wise?
Scene performance like frame rate?
Yes, exactly.
Right. Yeah, so the question is there anything that we need to do to get the scene performance really good for the animators? The answer is absolutely, yeah. So the character rigs are reasonably fast. Well, like you saw that they're really, really simple, so they're really, really fast. With face rig, because it's got all of these kind of different styles and different design elements going into it, the face rig as it is doesn't run at the moment in real time, so that's something that we're working on. But kind of the safe backup is at the pressing of the rig button, we break apart the face, so it just becomes like the only individual parts that we would actually want. And that means that we are essentially kind of deleting a huge part of the face that we don't actually need. Do you want to add anything to that?
No, I think basically what you said, but also, yeah, the way we try and do things is whenever we like publish a rig, we'll like bake it down, so anything that is linked, like the face or the character model or anything like that, will all just get baked straight down. So, yeah, like Vasil was saying, it's kind of, can we somehow flag all the variables that could potentially be like made destructive, so then when we do flatten it, it's kind of like those can all disappear or be kind of integrated.
Yeah, but also kind of all of the usual things apply, which is using simple geometries, as few modifiers as we can, everything that we're familiar with. Cool. Yes, you're over there.
On those puppeteering experiments, are you doing anything procedurally to smooth and reduce the resulting keys? Is that happening in real time alongside the recording, or is it happening after the fact?
That's a great question. So definitely kind of so the question is for the puppeteering, the recording, are we doing any of the smoothing or like other post-processing in real time as we are recording? We haven't really kind of spent much time actually experimenting with that. That's kind of for the future of ZooKit to be working on the recording. But for the recording that we've done, Dane, was there any post-processing done?
Yeah, only like 5 seconds worth. It would be like for that, it's called Silly Duck, that little character that had like a big yapping mouth. So for that was captured using like a Cintiq with wiggle bones, to give dynamic bones. And then what I would tend to do, I mainly found it was easier to do it with a Cintiq with a mouse, because you just naturally have like a kind of organic, resting position, whereas with a mouse, you often hit like these linear points. So that already helped quite a lot in the capturing process. And then sometimes it'd be a case of like hop into the graph editor, grab everything, like Gaussian, like blur the keys, like just quick a little bit, and then that would kind of be enough. But like the goal was really like trying to get it in the take. So, and then with the phone capture stuff, I think there was some level of smoothing, because again, it was kind of intended for camera tracking. So that would be cranked up to like 20% or something, just to get rid of like the big kinks. But like Vasil said, often what we're trying to do is embrace the fact that it feels puppeted or something like that. So a lot of the time, the sort of imperfections help.
Sweet. Yes, question over there.
I have a question regarding your rigging to because I didn't see the more detailed version of it. Since I came from a different software like Maya or something, I sometimes miss in Blender tools is that the pinning. Let's say like you have holding a character and you want to do motions like this, because you're trying to do all the fast track animations. I'm curious, like if you get behind anything like that, do you run into any pinning problems?
Right, so that's kind of like knee pinning, elbow pinning. Is it that kind of thing?
Usually
Yeah.
you have like I think the spine could be the main parent.
Yeah.
Sometimes you want to hold an object and your whole body needs to be pinned to that object.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, something.
Yeah, so the question is about kind of pinning different rig controls, whether that's something that we've done anything about in Blender. That's kind of like obviously part of the rig, right? So as I said, we're using Rigify at the moment, just vanilla Rigify without any modifications other than just kind of smooth things about how we parent things, which means that if Rigify doesn't have it, then we also don't have it. But building kind of rigs, because I think your question was more general, not specifically about this, about like moving to Blender from another piece of software. All of that is obviously definitely possible. It's stuff that we've done outside of Rigify in terms of kind of building these complex rigs. So it's definitely doable, it's just not part of this toolkit. And I think that's it actually for questions. Yeah, thank you very much, everybody. I just wanted to also say that if you do have any questions, just feel free to chat to us afterwards.